In 2006, a research team, myself, Professor In Ang and Professor Kay Anderson, who are here somewhere, you'll see them during the day anyway, from the Centre for Cultural Research at the University of Western Sydney, were funded by the Australian Research Council under its linkage project scheme to undertake a 3-year research project to track, document and evaluate C3 West. C3 West has given us a unique opportunity to investigate how it's facilitating established contemporary visual artists to extend their creative practice outside the studio and the gallery in new ways. And I'd first up really like to express our deepest appreciation to the partners, our research partners, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Penrith Visual and Performing Arts, Kazula Powerhouse, and now Campbelltown Arts Centre, and all of the people who've been involved in the research, and particularly here at the MCA, Judith Blackall and Abby Moncrief, who've done an enormous amount of liaison, and also Jock McQueenie. And today's symposium is itself an important part of our research, because really what we want to do is locate C3 West within national and international trends, and Lisanne has alluded to some of those. So this is an opportunity then to pause and reflect on C3 West, which is very much still an evolving initiative, and this is not a place here where we'll be presenting findings of our research or outcomes or drawing conclusions about C3 West. And in fact, what we're planning a book publication which will give a lot more detail and analysis than it's possible to do in the space of a day. But our intention today in bringing together a number of speakers who will talk about C3 West and its projects from diverse perspectives, and also international contributions to give us that broader context. And our intention is really to stimulate and contribute to those ongoing dialogues and debates about the important cultural role of contemporary cultural institutions and the distinctive contribution of contemporary visual artists in today's society. So what we want to do is talk about C3 West, but also about national and international trends that are shaping ways forward in engaging the arts with society. But first of all, what I'd like to do is to start by talking about ideas. The federal government chose recently to call its innovation blueprint Powering Ideas. And that resonates with something that Lisanne said. I'm going to be quoting people back to themselves a little bit today because we've done quite a few interviews with people involved in C3 West. But what Lisanne said when we asked her about the MCA Seeks Out Artists, is she said that for us it's about ideas. It's about looking for artists that have something interesting to communicate and an ability to communicate it in a way that makes sense to us at this moment in time. So certainly the notion that ideas are important actually seems more prevalent today than it was 3 years ago when we formed this research partnership with C3 West, when there's a lot of talk around creativity and innovation, but very much in abstract terms. So the Rudd government's vision for innovation in Australia calls on the power of ideas and rings with somewhat utopian overtones, but feels the need to reassure us that innovation is not an abstraction, nor is it an end in itself. It's how we make a better Australia and contribute to making a better world, a prosperous, fair and decent world in which everyone has the chance of a fulfilling life. So innovation may not be an abstraction, but it requires creativity to generate the ideas that will benefit us all. So here's another little quote from Powering Ideas. Our national innovation system is the system we use to harness the creativity of our people. It's the system we rely on to transform great ideas into great results for the community, the economy and the environment. The idea that conceptualisation and the capacity to bring new ways of thinking to realisation, the idea that those will become more in demand in the future is taken up by Daniel Pink, who suggests that a fundamental shift is now taking place from the information age towards what he calls the conceptual age. And he says that what we're doing is we're moving from an economy built on logical, linear, computer-like thinking that characterises the information age to build on the inventive, empathic and big picture capabilities of what's rising in its place, the conceptual age. And if you think that this is maybe a little bit outside the box, Daniel Pink has been taken up and promoted by Oprah. So it's quite possible that this is, if it's not part of the zeitgeist now, it will be very soon. So if you're thinking about how conceptualisation works in the real world, if that's what's needed, then surely the arts is the place to look to. And this is where C3 West is positioning itself. So the first C in the three Cs is commerce, or one of the Cs. I'm not necessarily getting them in the same order as everybody else. And the sense that creativity is a much needed resource across the economy and in business has become quite widespread in recent years. And in a book on arts business collaboration published in 2004, Lotte Darso points out that at least 50% of innovation is social and concerns new ways of collaboration, new constellations involving new types of people, for example, artists, and new processes of learning and knowledge creation. And an Australian writer on creative leadership and business, Ralph Curl, who's the founder of the Creative Leadership Forum, has said that the custodians of the processes of applied creativity are the artists in our community. And he said that for the future, the skills of those artists need to be taught and transferred to the movers and shakers in finance, government, manufacturing and agribusiness. So the spheres of contemporary art and of the corporate world have generally in the past come together mainly in terms of sponsorship, patronage and commissioning. C3 West is attempting a fresh approach to this interaction in the Australian context through bringing people together who wouldn't otherwise have come together, and it's important that it's important to acknowledge Jock's role in this, because this is actually something that he's actually been pushing forward for many years. That arts and culture can be a business resource in the same way that businesses draw on financial, human capital and other resources is in fact something that the Panthers CEO Glenn Matthews said to us that he'd realised was an outcome of their involvement in C3 West. And Max Cowan, who's the marketing manager for Panthers, is here today and will be speaking in panel a little bit later. So what Glenn Matthews said was that the challenge for Panthers as a recreation and hospitality provider is to compete with the increasingly sophisticated and diverse media and leisure activities that people can access from home. So what C3 West has provided is an opportunity to explore how to provide a richer and more differentiated environment that will hopefully lure people out of their lounge rooms. The second C in C3 West is community, and Lizanne spoke about that in the context of the UK experience and in the Australian as well. And it has to be said that community has been one of the most contested terms in public policy for many years. And it's often quite a politically charged term. It's often a fulcrum for debates about how to address present and historic inequalities, about what kind of future we want, and about what kinds of resources need to be applied to get there. And internationally, and particularly in Europe and America, there's a long history of engagements between artists and communities. And one such example is, of course, the Insight Network, which since 1992 has explored the liminal zone, border zone between San Diego and Tijuana in ways which stimulate creative processes of co-participation to produce artworks that make tangible an interactive experience of civic belonging. And we're very privileged to have Michael Critchman, Insight's director, here today to be able to speak to us about this work. And Karen Becker, who will also be speaking later from Stockholm, will be talking about the work of artists working in public spaces and local participation in Sweden. And many other examples exist, and we have other artists here today who've been working with C3 West in these ways. But I just also wanted to point out that one of the seminal influences for C3 West, or among the influences for C3 West, includes the work of Mary Jane Jacob since the early 1990s, whose work includes the Arts Festival of Atlanta in 1996, has been on promoting a public art that's rooted in the character of particular places and reflects a group consciousness and has a larger cultural resonance. And in speaking about the work at the 1996 Olympics, just in terms of actually getting occupying a space on that occasion, she says that we chose to compete in a different way, engaging Atlantans as collaborators and visitors, and investigating in each arena in American culture today, our contemporary art and the general public opponents or on the same side. And in Australia we have many examples of, particularly recently, of innovative community engagement projects working long-term with communities, such as the work of Lyndall Jones in the Evoca project, organisations like Feral Arts in Brisbane, Big Heart with their projects at the Northcote Public Estate, and Junk Theory. But in particular, Western Sydney must be acknowledged as having been an incubator for innovative strategies in the cultural field over many years, and particularly in the period since 1999, when the New South Wales Government's Western Sydney Arts Strategy started to facilitate increased investment in cultural activity and infrastructure in the region. And I think it's fair to say that C3 West wouldn't exist without this impetus, because the Western Sydney cultural partners have been able to grow and develop very significantly over recent years because of these initiatives that have targeted Western Sydney. But Western Sydney-based cultural organisations and arts workers have long had to confront negative stereotypes and simplistic representations, often repeated unreflectively, and have needed to consistently refuse to subscribe to tired welfare or deficit-based perceptions of Western Sydney culture. And there are many examples that could be mentioned of ways that they've done this, and exhibitions like Anita and Beyond, Vietnam Voices for Matthew and others, and many others, and the pioneering within many of the galleries in Western Sydney of a community curatorium model where communities are brought together in the development of exhibitions. And it's still the case that if you Google community curatorium, what you get are those Western Sydney projects. And also organisations in Western Sydney like Urban Theatre Projects and ICE. Now, notions of excellence and community have generally tended to be seen as either mutually exclusive or at the very least in tension with each other. And there's really no a priori reason to assume them to be mutually exclusive in this way, and indeed the distinctive style of community engagement that's happened in Western Sydney has pushed the boundaries of community-focused practice and resisted this tension over many years. And this is one important reason, I think, that this is a region with fertile conditions to attempt the kind of work that C3 West is doing. And the region's cultural institutions certainly understand very well the complexities of that dynamic tension between working closely with communities and achieving artistic excellence. Community, however, remains a highly problematic concept. Governments, arts organisations, businesses, funding bodies, each in their own way constitute their activities in relation to some notion of community or communities, and yet communities are always in flux. And if the aim of many of these inventions is community building in some sense, then to rely too heavily on an idea that there should be some community out there that can be relied on to self-identify or to pre-existingly identify in terms of some collective identification on the basis of shared characteristics would be a mistake. C3 West avoids this by leveraging pre-existing relationships or interfaces between its corporate partners and their constituencies. And in some ways I prefer the term constituencies because it has more of a sense of interaction and fluidity in that relationship. So although Panthers, for example, operates on a commercial basis, it's deeply rooted in and fundamentally forms part of its local community. And the aim of C3 West then is to intervene in that relationship or interface with it and remediate it in some way. And the role of the artist then is to be a kind of creative catalyst in this process. And in another of the C3 West projects, Ash Keating's project Activate 2750, that role of remediating an existing relationship in a particular place in Penrith between the commercial partner CETA and Penrith Council particularly was important there. So this brings us then, the role of the artist then brings us to the third C, which is contemporary art. And to quote Liz Ann again, what she said is the question for them is about how do you change people's perceptions of what contemporary art is and stop them thinking automatically, it's not for me. And she's often said that artists see the world differently. Simply seeing differently is not enough. What's also needed is the ability to take actions and negotiate, to bring what might be quite a singular vision into a form in which other people can be given a chance to receive and come to some understanding of it. In general terms, I think we can say that the C3 West artists' interventions are there to create a potential for transformation. And this afternoon we were hoping to show a short video interview with Jana van Heeswijk, who's one of the C3 West artists, which we conducted while she was in Goulburn in September, researching the project she's developing for Veolia and C3 West. We've been having some technical difficulties with that video, and it's possible that we might not have it, but we will see. Veolia has over 8,000 employees in Australia and New Zealand in the field of waste management, energy, water and transportation, and has a strong commitment to sustainable development. And Jana, in her interview with us, describes the way she works as in terms of creating a field of interaction. She puts it, what she does is to resculpt circumstances, often in a playful or humorous way, using highly collaborative processes that involve the participation of many community members and stakeholders. And what she says is, I think the quality of an artist is that we're capable to reimagine a certain situation, to reorganise, resculpt, rearranging reality, if you like, or I would like to say circumstances. And her internationally, her projects include projects like Valley Vibes and Facial World and the Blue House project, and there's just some images here. She says that her work is essentially about reconnecting communities to the places where they live, and she's going to be returning to Australia again in November for several weeks to work on that project in Goulburn. Sylvie Blochet and François Daune, who we're privileged also to have with us here for the symposium, describe their work, the work of their collective Campement Urbain, in terms of infiltration and of what they call a dispositive approach, which is an open way of working which involves changing their manner of working according to the approach of the other way involved. Again, this sense of creating a space in which interaction and transformation can occur. And Craig Walsh, who we will also be hearing from after morning tea, in the Work of Engagement panel, talks in somewhat parallel terms about his way of working when he says, I'm repositioning things so that we see them differently. So in the case of the Heads Up project for Panthers, what Craig tried to address was the rigid expectations of the experience of being in a football stadium or a registered club. And by subverting those expectations of environment, he shows a different way of understanding the relationships and interactions that can take place there. And in the case of Heads Up, about the importance of the fans as well as the players. And over the morning tea break, what we're going to be doing is rotating a slideshow which has some images from many of these projects. So the aim then, it seems to be that what will happen is a transformation of the relationships and the interactions. And Jana van Heijwijk has said that her work, she feels her work is successful if it leaves everyone slightly changed. So a key role in the development of C3 West has been a kind of brokerage in order for these relationships, in order for these relationships to come together and be built. While some of the artists in C3 West have themselves well-developed skills at translating between diverse perspectives and languages, C3 West has been distinctive in having an identified role for brokerage and making sure that that happens because it draws attention to the distinctive skills involved, the ability to speak to business people, community members and others, including artists and arts institutions in languages that they understand, linking them to curatorial understandings and joining the dots between corporate, community and contemporary art domains. But is it still art? A timely blog post this week in COFA's ArtRight blog, which is entitled C3 West, the MCA's outreach program, a bit of a stretch, suggests that the MCA may be successful in creating new avenues for artists to get paid, but are they making art? And the piece actually seems to have got a lot of its information about C3 West from a piece that Liz Ann wrote in the Griffith Review, so it didn't mention some of the work that has actually taken place. But this suggestion that when artists push the boundaries of what they do, there's a danger that what they do may no longer be able to be considered art. And it comes up from time to time in relation to the kind of work that C3 West tries to promote. And I was actually quite pleased to see this morning when I opened up the Sydney Morning Herald, Andrew Frost saying basically the same thing about Damien Hirst's recent work, is it still art? So the question, this question, are they making art, can be read simply as a definitional one. Will we still call it art if, as the blogger suggests, the artist acts as a consultant to a business? But it can also be read as a question about gatekeeping, and that's to say about who gets to say whether art is being made and about who gets to say whether the art that's being made is good. And such questions, I would suggest, are an understandable consequence of anxieties around the democratisation of value making in the arts, and undoubtedly really relate to that tension between community participation in the creation of new artworks and notions of excellence. As has been pointed out by a writer called Schraig, creativity often builds on the shards and fragments of different understanding. That's one of my favourite quotes about creativity. He goes on to say that we don't just collaborate with people, we also collaborate with the patterns and symbols they create. In other words, we're collaborating in the realm of ideas. Artists like the artists involved in C3 West are not intimidated by the idea of working with community members who are diverse in their opinions, perspectives and priorities, and certainly observing artists like Sylvie and Francois, Craig or Jana in the way that they work. They just take it all in their stride, and they're able to work with this complexity and create and deliver a concept with clarity that does justice and makes tractable that complexity. So to invite a broader participation in debates about creating new notions of value and excellence in the arts is perhaps risky, but perhaps also ultimately worthwhile. And I'd like to give the last word to the residents of Penrith. And there were many diverse reactions to Activate 2750, including a lot of people who said it was a pile of rubbish, but also many who said that they were happy to accept it as art and to have it there in Penrith, even though it might not be the kind of art that they liked. And in particular, this was the comment of one female Penrith resident who said, "Oh, I think it's fantastic. I think any kind of artwork, any form of artwork is great for the area, and especially this, to raise people's awareness of what we're actually putting in landfill and what's not going to decompose and what's going to stay there for thousands of years or whatever." So we have to be aware of that sort of thing, and I think this is fabulous. Thank you.